Hi, welcome to the Conscious Eating Summit. I'm your host, Dr. Nancy Kroll. I have today with me Dr. Ariele Foster. Dr. Ariele is a doctor of physical therapy, interdisciplinary yoga teacher, and also founder of the Yoga Anatomy Academy. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ariele.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, can you share with our viewers a little bit about the work that you do and what inspires you to do it?
Yeah, I started teaching yoga in 2001. I was fresh out of undergraduate, and I have always loved yoga. I had a yoga teaching grandmother. I have a yoga teaching grandmother, and I injured myself a few years into teaching. I'd moved to DC to work on environmental justice issues, but when I got this injury, I saw a physical therapist, and I had kind of a light bulb moment, like, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I went back to school, got my doctorate in physical therapy, and just have been working hard the last number of years integrating those two professions and having a lot of fun with it. I started recently, a couple years ago, this website called yogaatomyacademy.com and began offering an online yoga anatomy mentorship to yoga teachers, which has just been an incredible experience. So much fun. I feel like it's the highest use of my time. And most recently had a course come out with Yoga Journal called Fascia Release for Yogis or Yoga. And that is a really cool 6-week online course that I'm excited to share.
And you're located in DC now, right?
Yeah, I've lived here for a long time.
Awesome. So we're going to talk a little bit about fascia because you seem to be the fascia expert. And can you explain, first of all, I think there might be people watching that they don't even know what fascia is. Like, that sounds completely foreign. So can you just start by telling me what is fascia?
Yes. So fascia is a lot of things, but it is this kind of fabric, this knitting fabric in short of the body. It's kind of the scaffolding and the fabric of the body. And if you just give me one moment, I'm going to open up an actual really longer, more profound definition I think is so gorgeous. Master, here we go. So there's a woman named Jill Miller who I would consider a bit more of an expert in fascia than me. She's got a really interesting story. And the definition that she's devised of fascia is so beautiful. I have to share it. So, oops, I am in the wrong document. Here we go. Let me open it up. All right. So just to give you a brief history of what got Jill Miller into fascia release, which, going to the source is going to be a much better story. But this relates to the summit that we're in. She had an experience of an eating disorder. And when she lay down, a yoga teacher told her to try laying down over a blanket roll. It actually brought up this extraordinary sensation, almost like the word that comes to mind is exorcism of some of the intense anxiety and holding she was having in her belly and in her abdomen after years of struggling with bulimia. So this is Jill Miller's definition. Fascia is your living, fibrous, and gelatinous body-wide web. It's a seam system that provides structure, protection, repair, force transmission, and body sense. It is your interconnected soft tissue scaffolding that gives your body form, shape, and felt continuities of motion. Its unique arrangement links other connective tissue structures to one another, thus forming a comprehensive web with biotensional and compressive integrity. Its variable textures interconnect the multiple layers and systems of the body while serving as highways for tissues to relate to one another. That includes musculoskeletal, vascular, neurological, visceral, lymphatic, and other systems of the body. So in short, fascia is the body's living aqueous knitting fabric.
I love that. I obviously, part of the reason acupuncture works is because of fascia. So yeah, it's really interesting how it's all about the connection of all the organ systems. Um, and even just like the different levels that you mentioned. So what do you find with fascia, what are the sorts of things that you typically, is it more physical things that you're seeing, in terms of pain, where people are coming in with chronic pain and it's repetitive, and so if they release the fascia, does that help shift the pain? Or like what kind of things are you typically seeing whenever you see issues in the fascia?
So I'm a fairly hands-on physical therapist. I don't think it's the one and only treatment that anyone should get from a physical therapist. But when you first come in to see me as a patient, many times one of my first kind of set of tools out of the toolbox will be working with myofascial release, because we all have certain holding patterns in our body. And that comes from different ways that we use our body that may not be optimal. Whether you're an athlete training for performance of a particular sport, or whether you are someone who, like most people these days, has some kind of job where you have to sit. So sitting is not really an optimal repetitive movement pattern, but we end up doing it anyway. So myofascial release is really helpful, particularly for pain management and getting symptoms down. It can also be really helpful for a host of other kinds of symptoms that people have, not just pain, but maybe clicking, these kind of biomechanical symptoms. And even it can be really helpful, I think, as a tool for increased body awareness, body sense, increased capacity to propriocept, meaning where we are in space, so better improving your balance, for example. It can be a tool for improving the hydration and maybe even theoretically the fluidity and hydration qualities of your skin and your muscles, et cetera, et cetera. And I even improve on a bigger, like a kind of a different level, though, our response to stress and anxiety. Like, actually, it sounds like I'm making big, sweeping, unscientific statements, but all of this is supported by the research.
So I'm just curious, does rolling help the fascia? Like foam rolling? Or what is
Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to say a couple things quickly. This idea of fascial release or fascia release, it might be a term that evolves over the years. I think that it's a pretty good fit for what we do now, like what I do with my hands and what I might do if I'm like rolling on a foam roller or some balls, but it may not actually be the way that we think of it in the future. The research is evolving on this. And you're not necessarily making immediate changes in the tissue quality or tissue length when you're doing myofascial release. What we know right now is that the response of our nervous system is actually the most measurable qualitative or quantitative change that's happening from myofascial release. So when you perform myofascial release, it actually activates a more sense of parasympathetic side of your nervous system, the tendon befriend side, as opposed to fight or flight, the more active, gripping, tensioning side. And so by practicing self myofascial release or having somebody practice myofascial release on you, you can drop more into a state of tend and befriend.
Interesting. So when people are like, when they have a tension, or is it tension in the myofascial release, or what is it? Is it considered?
You could call it tension, yeah.
So when there is tension, is there a tendency to be, does that person tend to be stuck more in their sympathetic nervous system? Or is that not really directly correlated?
I don't know that I would make that statement globally for some, like an individual as a whole, but I do think that if you carry a lot of stress, if you're somebody who hasn't managed to process stress well, or set up your life in a way that automatically manages some components of stress for you, which is possible, by the way, then yeah, you're going to end up carrying some of that most likely in your tissues. And just as an example, I remember being in my early 20s and working at these different nonprofits in the city and riding my bike everywhere. And I was so determined to live off of these very meager salaries that I would carry my lunch and I would carry my water bottle, and it would end up being like a huge burden just to carry all of my stuff with me. And that caused aches and pains in itself that I probably wouldn't have had if I just relaxed a little bit and allowed myself to buy lunch out or something along those lines, you know?
Yeah.
So I think I think I would hesitate to say that because you have a stress point that you are a stressed out person. I probably have plenty of tension points in my body that I will kind of explore and wake up any day, but it doesn't mean I'm not doing a good job or a reasonable job of handling stress as a whole. I think it's just a natural function of being alive these days.
And you had mentioned to me earlier, like the amount of water someone's consuming is super important for their fascia. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Totally. So if you go back to that definition that I read from Jill Miller, and thank you guys for your patience with that. So that idea that it's a living aqueous knitting fabric, the reason she uses the term aqueous is because on a cellular level, most of the fascial fibers are what's called hydrophilic. And hydrophilic means they're attracting water. Mm-hmm. So fascia is actually part of how we stay hydrated as human beings. Good idea. So if you have kind of going off and riffing off this idea that there are adhesions, although again, this is a terminology that may evolve over the years as we learn more and more. But let's say there are stuck parts of your body, parts that just simply don't slide and glide well. And by practicing myofascial release on these body parts, including in the abdomen, you can actually improve the quality of tissue hydration. I think that this is fair to say, because the reason why it's not sliding and gliding well is because, not necessarily the reason, but the fact that it's not sliding and gliding well means that the tissues are not getting the hydration that they optimally would have.
Interesting. So when someone is more hydrated, they're going to tend to have less of that. So one thing I'm wondering is how does the fascia being stuck create pain?
So what we have found out is that most of the sensory nerve endings in the body are not in where we think they are. Like probably most people listening to this think, oh, I sense pain in my skin, or I sense pain in my bone when I break the bone. I sense pain in my muscle if I tear my hamstring. Actually, most of the neural endings, the sensory neural endings, are in our fascial network, which is the periosteum, the surface of the bone, the epimysium, the surface of the muscle tissue, or the part that's woven through, embedded in the muscle tissue, or between the kind of loose fascial network as well.
So if someone's been, you talked a little bit about how the sympathetic nervous system is related to the fascia. Is this the same way of how fascia release can also affect like digestive issues or anxiety? Or what is that?
I think that would be fair to say. So what I am really interested in as a yoga teacher and a physical therapist, and as someone who's had my share of random injuries sometimes from yoga, I am super interested research-wise in hypermobility. And hypermobility is better classified, I should say, in the UK than it is in the United States. But in the United States, we might call it any number of names. There's official Ehlers-Danlos syndromes, at least 4 types. And there are classifications like joint hypermobility syndrome that aren't necessarily that Ehlers-Danlos, and things that you can track genetically, things that you can't track genetically. But essentially, as you can imagine, there's a spectrum of people, some of whom are tighter, some of whom are more restricted in their just baseline mobility. And the people who tend to have more mobility tend to come to yoga. Just like
it's easier.
It's going to be
Or
more
like not as uncomfortable maybe.
totally.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
So
cooler.
yeah. And then you might think, well, so yogis are so great at stress management. We're so wonderful at all that. But if you have hypermobility, there is a correlated finding in the research that shows that you may also experience higher levels of anxiety, just baseline anxiety. You may have a greater tendency towards anxiety. And that is associated with, in part, a looser arrangement of your fascial network. The collagen fibers that make up your fascial network, the looser they are, the more gripping actually your muscles have to do. And this is really interesting to me, this research, because I've heard over the years and rolled my eyes a million times at yogis saying, oh my God, my hamstrings are so tight, as they literally like sit in the splits. And it's makes sense that if you have loose joint structure, if you have loose connective tissues, your baseline, that your muscles are going to end up tightening up, even if they can't actually tighten to protect you to stay into a lesser amount of range, but that they will kind of hold those tension patterns. So this is really, not kind of the thing that I might have thought before I went into physical therapy school. I might have thought, well, people who are really stretchy don't need myofascial release or don't need that kind of tissue work. But in fact, it's the opposite many times. So it is a form of grounding. It is a form of kind of getting the tissue to hydrate, getting the tissues to slide and glide better over one another. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, for someone with hypermobility, you still need a lot of strengthening. But so that's the connection.
Yeah, you had said that the people that tend to have anxiety have looser fascia, right? So is that what you said?
The people who have looser connective tissue in general, which is like an even bigger umbrella term than fascia. But certainly fascia is one huge component of that in our bodies. So people who have loose connective tissue also many times have demonstrated higher baseline tendencies towards anxiety.
Interesting.
And there's other contributors to anxiety too, aside from that. You could be very not loose connective tissue structure and have it for some other reason.
So in this program that you've done through Yoga Journal for fascia release through yoga, we'll put the link for that also in the email.
Awesome.
That people are watching this, but I'm just curious, are you doing like lots of prop type yoga, or is it like, I don't know, I'm just curious what kind of yoga tends to release the fascia? Is it yin yoga, or is there a particular type of yoga that releases the fascia?
Yeah, super interesting question. Okay, so my thoughts on yin yoga are, first of all, subject to evolving. But from a biomechanical point of view, I just don't see a lot of value in yin yoga. Again, I'm definitely open to other conversations on this. And I have a YouTube video where I talk about this with a yin yoga teacher. But if you could imagine, let's say the hip socket, my hand right here, this little C shape is going to be the hip socket. And then the thigh bone in it, and just taking it to its end range and letting it park there is actually going to change the joint capsule itself. So think of the joint capsule as like the saran wrap around a joint, and it's changing it. You're going to be in that pose for 4 minutes. Well, it's changing it in one direction only. And unless you're evaluated by a physical therapist, so every now and then I will do a joint mobilization and try to change someone's joint capsule. But unless you're evaluated by a physical therapist and working in the exact direction in which you have a limitation, the hip can move in a really profoundly large range of motion, like a pendulum, basically. So you're setting yourself up, in my opinion, for hip labral tears, poor joint mechanics all over the body. And also it's just painful sometimes. So many times through yin yoga, because you're not as supported as you might be in restorative yoga, you are going into places that are painful. And yin teachers talk about the difference between compressive and tensional forces, so that they don't want you to feel compression like bone on bone, but they want you to feel tensional. But my question is, and I've worked with literally thousands of patients because I've been in some very busy clinics, some very busy hospital settings over the years. I'm like, how the heck do people know what's tensional and what's compressive? And it's not always going to be based.
But like sensation. That's the way I thought it was defined. Through a teacher that I heard that like the tensional was you actually feel the stretch versus the non-tensional feels like when you extend your elbow straight.
Right. There is definitely such a thing as being able to distinguish between a stretch and just the end range of your motion.
Yeah.
If you're at the end range of your motion, so let's say I go to a yin yoga class and we get into butterfly pose, Baddha Konasana, soles of the feet together, knees out to the side, and there's no props under my knees. Well, for the first few moments out of the 4 minutes, I probably will feel a tensional stretch in the inner thighs. But then it might switch to a compression stretch. And in the meanwhile, teachers are giving cues, in my experience of attending yin classes, that's like, breathe through the sensation. You're discouraged often from changing positions. The idea is that you're holding it for a period of time to release the fascia, to open more range of motion. And so if you're already at the end of your range of motion, but you're getting all of these social cues to stay where you are, that defeats the purpose. And I just think that the concept of yin yoga from a biomechanical point of view, from what I know, is problematic. And it's not just the poses themselves, it's the package of everything and the fact that it's happening in a group class. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, like, what do you feel like if you could tell the viewers, like, what are the top benefits of releasing your fascia? What would it be?
Yeah.
Like,
so
why should they go like do your yoga journal fascia course, or like what what is it that's going to be like, do this now?
Well, everyone should do what makes them happy and lights them up. But in terms of like looking at the difference between yin versus myofascial release, my take on it is that myofascial release can be much more personalized, can be easily integrated into your self-care routine, takes less time. You can incorporate it into even yoga classes if you're a yoga teacher. This particular course I did with Yoga Journal, which was such a fun thing, is 6 weeks of self-care techniques from everything from your feet to your head almost. And that I think is really, really empowering. Like one of the things I love about being a physical therapist is that, yes, I might do some hands-on stuff when you first come to me, but my goal is to make you not have to come to see me again. Or my goal is to have you back for tune-ups once every 6 months. I don't want to, be greedy and hold on to people if you're feeling better.
Awesome. So you have a free gift for our viewers. Can you share what that is?
Yeah. So I'm going to put together a video, just a simple self-myofascial release video on like some of the steps that you can do on your own to take care of your fascia. And I think this relates to healthy eating because it drops us into our bodies more. It improves our proprioception. It can help us to feel better so that we can like not only get our tissues moving and gliding better, but then to be able to exercise more, which is actually a huge part of how we digest and assimilate the nutrients from food. And yeah, I don't know that I'll do abdominal release video necessarily, but I can also send a link to some good abdominal release videos that I know of.
Thank you. That's super generous. So everyone, just so you
My
know,
pleasure.
Download that. You'll just go back to the email where you watched or clicked on this video. And so the link for that will be there, as well as a link for her yoga journal series. And Ariel, I have one more question for you.
Go.
If you could give your younger self any advice, what would it be?
Oh, trust yourself so much more. I think I wasted a lot of time just waiting for permission to do things with my life. And when I just gave myself permission, it opened up like a whole new world for me. It's been amazing.
Awesome. That is awesome advice.
Yeah.
I know for myself as well, that lack of Yeah, just like knowing or trusting yourself. You can spend a lot of time questioning what you're doing. That's really good advice.
Yeah, it's not bad to question what you do either. It's a good thing. It's a good quality. But waiting for permission from others to move ahead with your life is not the highest use of your time.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
thank you, Nancy.
so
Speaking of high use of your time, thank you for doing this and sharing it with everyone.
thank you. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today for the Conscious Eating Summit. Make sure you check your email tomorrow for the next interview. And Dr. Ariele, thank you so much again for sharing all of your knowledge with us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, bye.
Bye.